Well, this is going to be a busy week, isn't it? Hello and welcome along to another manager special from the Honest Football Podcast as we review another change in the dugout at Championship level, the first of four that we're waiting on news of this week. And of course, today we are talking about Norwich City, who maybe over the last 24 hours have surprised a lot of people. After sacking Liam Manning at the start of the international break, they have decided to replace him with Philippe Clement, the former Genk, Club Brugge, Monaco and Rangers manager, who joins the club as the new head coach today and will take charge for the first time this weekend. He's joined by one of his assistants and will talk in great detail about the new man and of course what we expect from Norwich moving forward. But as always, when we start these podcasts, we want to go and have a look at the former man and see the situation Norwich City are in and what on earth went wrong or right. And unfortunately for Liam Manning, who was the former man at Norwich City, it all went very wrong very quickly, didn't it? Let's go back to the summer where we started our manager special season with Liam Manning leaving Bristol City to join Norwich City. Bit of a controversial move and a lot of divided opinions on it, on whether it was a sidestep, whether it was for a club with bigger potential, whether it was the right move or not from a footballing point of view. Of course, Liam Manning had just led Bristol City to the playoffs and had left them to go to a Norwich side that had missed out at their expense. Now, there were some other factors for that were unfortunately steeped in tragedy. Given the situation for Liam Manning's personal life the year before, there was more than footballing decisions made there, and moving back closer to home and closer to family obviously made sense from that side of things. But if we focus on the pitch of what's happened this season, after an okay start, unfortunately, it faded really quickly, and in the last number of weeks, it's been really poor, hasn't it? Let's be honest. Norwich City have lost every single home game in a championship this year. And if you go back to 2 years ago, where fans to an extent were unhappy with the style of football under David Wagner as they finished in sixth place and lost in the playoffs, the one thing that you could say about Norwich City is they weren't going to lose very many games at home. They were set up sturdily, they had a goal threat, and while they've lost some of those attacking talents in recent years, it really was a poor start to the season at home. And in a lot of them, they were conceding so many goals and so many chances. And one of the things I talked about last year with Bristol City is, yes, it wasn't exciting to watch, but Liam Manning went against his own usual standards, his own philosophy to make Bristol City solid and the best they could be. If you go back and look at his teams, particularly at Oxford and MK Dons, they played exciting, possession-based football. They were constantly aggressive. They were constantly pressing high. And when he realised he couldn't do that at Bristol City, he made a team that was hard to beat. And he made the Championship's most inconsistent team pretty consistent. So when he came to Norwich, I was kind of expecting him to learn those two things and put them together and find a step somewhere in the middle. But he seemed pretty intent early doors on playing that style that he had at MK Dons and at Oxford, which obviously Norwich were calling out for as well. That was part of the agreement. But it did leave them very vulnerable at the back. And with a new look team, with a lot of younger signings this year, there were tons of them coming into the club. They lost some very star attacking players, as we know. If you look at last summer, Nunes and Borja Sainz both moved on. One of those very controversially, of course. You've also got Jonathan Rowe the year before, but where the money came in this summer. So there was a lot coming into the club, and behind the scenes, that team has been reshaped with a lot of young players from across Europe, not just the UK, and then a couple of bits of dotted experience such as Jeffrey Schlupp, and maybe the signing that Liam Manning's worked with before in Harry Darling, which perhaps didn't work out quite so well, and a centre-half that I'm perhaps not the biggest fan of in the Championship, if I'm being honest. But it was an interesting summer, and I think the one thing we all knew is it was going to take time. And I sort of said very early in the season when we were making our predictions that I didn't think Norwich would make the top six this year, and I didn't actually think they'd be near if they lost Josh Sargent, which was linked at the time. That, fortunately for them, they haven't done, and he's still at the club, which will be a benefit for the new man we talk about in a minute. But we are finding that the squad was a little bit incohesive, and more importantly, we saw that they really struggled when they went behind in games. And that is something that with a young side that's not got a huge amount of experience in it, and certainly in sort of key areas, that midfield battle, new look team, it's going to be very difficult to be consistent at those levels. And I think we saw that as the confidence started to drift, there just almost seemed like no way back pretty much immediately. And it kind of would have been okay the other way round. If you're losing every away game, it's far from ideal, of course, but Norwich had the sixth worst away record when they reached the playoffs a couple of years ago. if you're winning in front of your home fans, you're normally going to get a little bit of leeway. But the fact that they lost every single game at Carrow Road just compounded the misery. And in the end, after 3 wins in 17 matches in all competitions, unfortunately, Liam Manning is off, with Norwich on just 9 points and second bottom of the Championship. And perhaps fortunate that Sheffield Wednesday have gone into administration on that front, because one of those spots for relegation, perhaps not so much up for grabs now. But with that comes change and a chance for a new man to make a difference. So for now, we need to go and have a look at a Norwich City statement as they appoint Philippe Clement as the club's new head coach. They said they're pleased to appoint him, of course. He has signed a contract for 3.5 seasons through till the summer of 2029. Joined in the coaching set up by his usual assistant, Stefan van der Heyden, who was with him at Rangers as well, and at Club Brugge before that. And of course, further additions to come. We'd expect him to fill that team out. He's talked about his excitement to work in a difficult situation and turn things around, which is something that perhaps he's not got a huge amount of experience with in his career, which we'll talk about in a second. And Ben Napper, the under pressure sporting director, both for the transfer work that's been done behind the scenes and for the constant churn of managers, has talked about the fact that there was no hesitation to bring him in, which seems a little bit off considering that John Dahl Thomason officially ruled himself out yesterday and was very odds on to get the job. It seemed that there'd definitely been discussions on that front. But there's no doubt they're absolutely right when they say that Philippe Clement is an incredibly experienced and prominent head coach, has worked at the top level for sides pretty much established in European football every season, and he has got that experience at a higher level, which for Norwich in the future could be great. But has he had that experience in this position? Maybe not quite so much. That's the interesting one. Of course, you've got to add the other factor in as well. Liam Manning came in the summer at the expense of Jack Wilshere, who was at the club as a coach before. He's now just taken over as the manager at my club, Luton Town. So that's going to be interesting to see how it pans out. But let's talk about Philippe Clement, who obviously hasn't been in a dugout since leaving Rangers in February, which is probably where most British football fans know him from, but only tells a very small part of his story. He's someone who spent most of his playing career in Belgium, had a brief spell at Coventry, but otherwise always been in Belgian football, and most of his managerial career the same, which perhaps is a concern, because there's no doubt his best periods of success have come in Belgium, doing an incredible job at Genk, helping to rebuild Club Brugge and taking them into European football. And then obviously has managed Monaco and Rangers since then as he's expanded his career. At Monaco had a decent start, but ended up missing out on Europe in the second season, finishing in 6th place, having a couple of cup embarrassments as well. And then at Rangers, obviously managed to get one trophy on the board, produced some really good, odd highlight European performances. But domestically, the word that they couldn't find was consistency, which is something, obviously, if you're managing Celtic or Rangers, has to be there. You have to be winning most weeks, which unfortunately towards the end for him, they just weren't. But generally, he's got a pretty good CV. He's obviously managed big clubs. He's still got good win rates and good percentage records at all of them, and has played good football at times while having an element of pragmatism to his game. So again, this is going to be one of those interesting situations. We saw a few years ago with David Wagner, who I constantly reference here because he went completely against the way he plays. Norwich fans talk about the boring football that Wagner produced, which to an extent I understand. They sat very deep, but they had an experienced defensive line that didn't have a lot of pace in it. So he had to sit behind the ball. But if you go and look at the rest of his career, he's had teams that have dominated. The Huddersfield team he took up in England before were just brilliant to watch. They were exciting. They dominated the ball. They counter-attacked at speed, something that the Norwich side he had wasn't capable of doing. And I look at this one and maybe think a little bit differently, but will he be able to do it instantly? Have Norwich got a good enough and a physical enough defence, an athletic enough back four to be able to do that instantly, to be able to push higher up the pitch and not give away goals? Because based on the evidence we've seen so far this season, the answer probably is no. I think we will see some sort of turn halfway between what Liam Manning was trying to do and what had happened previously. But obviously this is something we've talked about with a few clubs. We mentioned it with Southampton when they came down from the Premier League the first time, is appointing head coaches in succession with completely different philosophies or that are producing completely different styles of play. Wagner obviously saw that he had to shore the team up and made Norwich defensive. They then went for Thorup, who went for this ultimate possession style, but ended up getting caught out quite a lot. Liam Manning has now gone for this high pressing system and been caught out defensively at times as well. And now Philippe Clement is, on paper, a bit more pragmatic, albeit he's produced teams that score goals. He does generally like to set up with a solid shape. So we're not seeing consistency in selection or behind the scenes. There's not a general plan at Norwich. And that's something that you can understand why the fans criticise the sporting director, because it does seem to be a bit slapdash. The same with the money they brought in for the star players this summer. They do seem to have just spread it across, yes, players that probably statistically, the data analysts have suggested they're great players. And if 2 or 3 work out, it covers the cost, which is fine. But you've got a lot of players that haven't played in England before. You've got a lot of players who are young, who haven't got a huge amount of football experience. And you're coming into the Championship, which is one of the biggest leagues in Europe. And gelling that together, still producing results, relying on Josh Sargent, but without the same level of service he had last year, it's going to be quite difficult. Having said that, the one criticism of Rangers was at times when they were dominating games under Clement is they didn't maybe have that goal scorer. I know Dessa still had a decent record, but they weren't just taking their chances. They didn't have that ruthless striker. And the one positive I give to Clement is they managed to keep Josh Sargent. And if they can keep him fit for the majority of the season, which is always a big if, unfortunately, with him, you have to feel that he's going to give them half a chance. Because if you can get chances to him, you know he's going to score a lot. I still think he is the most prolific striker in the Championship on paper. And I still think if they can keep hold of him for the year, they've got a chance of rising up the division a bit. Because you look at the Norwich situation now, and let's move on to where they are in the table and what we expect to happen for the rest of the season. Philippe Clement takes on a Norwich team that have been in rotten form, obviously no points at home, on 9 points, second bottom of the league. However, despite being 16 points off the playoffs, and that probably looking like an unlikely distant future goal at the moment, he has got the opportunity to try and turn things around a little. And I know they've got a tough game this Saturday as they go away to a Birmingham side that have been relatively solid at home. But you look at their home games after that, Norwich, his first few in charge. On Tuesday night, they've got Oxford United, who have been abysmal on the road since they came up, bar one performance at Bristol City this year. And then they've got QPR, who have had a couple of shaky defensive displays as well. Then you've got a tough run of games, which is going to be difficult for them. But those 2 home games at first, if he can pick up even a win and a draw, or at least one exciting performance in that, you will start to get the fans on board. You'll start to get a little bit of momentum. And then going into those more difficult matches where you've got a couple of very big clashes. Sheffield United, the other real strugglers this year, away from home. Watford away, very good side at home. And then Southampton, who are looking for a manager as well at home. It does lead them into Christmas in a really interesting spell. Their festive fixtures are against sides that have generally been overperforming and the ones they're playing in the next week or two. So if they can get those results against the likes of QPR and Watford early on, it will give them momentum going into the reverse fixtures due to the way the Championship works a few weeks later. But overall, we normally ask these 2 questions at the end, which is, will the manager see out his contract and will he be a success at the club? Now, the simple answer to the first one is almost certainly no, because a 3.5-year deal is very unlikely to be fulfilled in a Championship, given the average manager lifespan. And I'm surprised it's as long a deal as it is. Maybe for Philippe Clement, that's security. It's a position we mentioned he's not been in before. Rangers, Monaco, Genk, Club Brugge, all competing at the top end. Here he's got to do a bit of firefighting before he can start to build for the future. At 16 points off the playoffs, in any other Championship season, you'd say probably isn't possible to compete. If they can get momentum, you'd say maybe yes, because this Championship season is more open than normal. However, I just don't think Norwich have got the experience, the quality and the consistency in the team to be able to do it while trying to gel half a new team. And I think, unfortunately, while they've underperformed so far this season, it's probably going to be another year before we see the best of them. And it's whether Philippe Clement is given the chance to get a bit of experience into the club to maybe change the way and the thinking a little bit, or whether it's going to be, no, this is the process, but we're going to give you time to implement it. And I'm genuinely intrigued to see what happens there because, as I mentioned before, consistency and clear thinking and a clear vision is not something we've seen while Ben Napper has been sporting director at Norwich. And for that, I can completely understand why the fans are frustrated. So do I think he'll be a success? It's hard to tell. I think Norwich will stay up this year. I think there are some poor sides drifting after an okay start. And I do think they'll get themselves out of the bottom 3. But a lot of clubs are panicking already. We've mentioned that 4 managers are waiting to be appointed. Philippe Clement is the first of them. And there is going to be a lot of change down at that bottom end this season. Sheffield Wednesday, you would expect to gone. Sheffield United, again, we said you'd expect them to pick up, but they've had a difficult time getting into form as well. So it is going to be a really interesting rest of the season. And the one thing that Philippe Clement and Norwich can't afford is a slow start here, because if you don't win at home to the likes of Oxford, who you'd be hoping to drag into the battle, and possibly QPR, then the Sheffield United game as well, if you come out of those without a victory, you then start to look up and think, who are we actually catching here? So I do think there's going to be a slight adjustment in January. I think Philippe Clement will keep them up, but whether or not they can be a long-term success is going to come down to me, to what happens off the pitch over the next 18 months, whether in transfer windows they find that right balance, and whether they give the manager time to allow these players to settle into a new country, allow this team to build some momentum, build a style of play, and actually consistently add to it. And of course, I guess the other question in that is, how long can they keep Josh Sargent while they're underperforming and he's one of the best goal scorers in the Championship? It's going to be an interesting question. It doesn't really matter what I think, though, does it? Norwich City fans, what do you make of your new appointment? Are you excited? Are you underwhelmed? It's weird to see that there's been a little bit of a hysterical social media reaction, because obviously a lot of Rangers fans have got involved there, and there's some short-term memories on that front. But he is a good head coach. Whether or not he can do it in English football is going to be a very interesting question. Let us know your thoughts on it. If you're a fan of another Championship club, what do you make of the appointment? Do you think Philippe Clement's the right man? Were you as surprised as we were in the last 24 hours when the situation changed pretty rapidly? And how do you think Norwich will get on for the rest of this season and beyond? Give us your thoughts in the comments. And if you did enjoy this brief look of Philippe Clement being appointed as the new Norwich City head coach in place of Liam Manning, and please do put a thumbs up on the video, subscribe and turn that notification bell on, because this is the first of many I think we'll have over the coming days. We're also back tomorrow following the international break to look ahead to the weekend fixtures in the EFL Championship. We'll have the full match week predictions, and as always, you guys can play along in the comments of that one. So come and get involved. We're here every week with that. For now, though, a massive thank you for watching this Championship Manager special, and we'll be back tomorrow with our weekend predictions and maybe more manager specials too.